Hey guys, Stock Saturday, and it's another green week, beating the market again. This can't go on forever, but a good while it lasts. So I'm up 6% for the week. S&P looks like up about 2%. Nasdaq up sort of just over 3%. So yeah, very nice. And this is sort of coming from partly Cleanspark again, but partly the gold and silver, in particular Coeur Mining. So very nice. Not a huge amount of news from the looks of it, just gold and silver sort of doing quite well. Coeur Mining sort of moving towards profit. So yeah, very nice. So no earnings this week, but we did have the summary of economic projections and the Federal Reserve FOMC meeting, which was rather interesting. They've sort of pretty much hinted that they're done with hiking. You can never sort of rule that out because they have to, keep a lid on some things at least. But yeah, they've come out with this and sort of certainly reduced some figures down from what they had. You sort of see core PCE inflation they had in September as 3.7% for the year, and they've changed that to 3.2. Obviously, we're at the end of the year now, so they know. But next year they've also reduced it down to 2.4% and 2.2% 2025. So they're saying near enough sort of normalising out. Obviously they can't predict quite this far into the future. Sort of a couple of years ago these were completely different, even for 2024 and 5. And longer run they're always going to say 2%. Across the board and sort of normal GDP and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's their numbers, and they've sort of projecting more rate cuts as well. They were sort of projecting in September being at 5.75% by the end of the year, which they haven't gone to. This is the midpoint, so it's 5.25 to 5.5%. And next year they were sort of projecting 2 rate cuts from there, where they've now looking at 4.6%, and then down to 3.6, down to 2.9, and then this long-term average 2.5. But I always think these are kind of nonsense. But yeah, certainly an interesting spread. And I do love still looking at the individual people. So this is all of the board members. Obviously 2023, they're all the same at 5.5%. But then it starts to very sporadically sort of drift apart. 2024, it's sort of ranging from 4% to still 5.5%. And 2025 ranging from 2.5% to the Mega Hawk, as I call him, we sort of noted last time, I think he was at 6% for even 2025. He's still saying, so unchanged, basically, in 2 years, which, yeah, we all know the economy can't handle that. I'm not sure where he's getting that from. Even in 2026, 5%. He's basically saying it won't cause anything worth changing that for. So a bit crazy. I'm not sure we quite get to 2.5% in 2 years, but unless we get a severe recession. But yeah, I think they want to sort of try and go for this soft landing, which at the moment seems to be sort of potentially possible, but it's not happened for sort of, I think it's happened once in about 50 years. So yeah, threading a needle for sure. And these sort of graphs indicate really the same thing that was in the table above, but just sort of gives you a bit more of a visual representation. So the various members had sort of lower GDP in the previous meeting, similar for sort of 2024 and 2025, but certainly this year they were expecting to be a fair bit lower. So the economy has surprised, and it seems like the better economy and sort of potentially reducing rates next year has just sparked life into everything. The dollar has sort of been down, gold and silver up, crypto up, risk assets up, all stocks pretty much up, and everyone's happy. So yeah, whether this sort of a final blow-off run until the inevitable recession next year. We don't know, but I think we'll know sort of over the next few months. So just a bit of news on some of my holdings, as there's no earnings really released. So Stellantis still sort of pushing forward with their, some would say, slow electric rollout. Fiat sort of pushing on. They obviously have the 500 electric, and sort of America, they've brought out the 600 electric, the slightly bigger one. And they're going to be releasing the Panda in an electric. Sort of always a very popular, small, very cheap car, sort of no frills, cheaper than the 500 even, and sort of more square and boxy, sort of seems to be more popular with older people, but that's fair enough. And a fully electric version, about €23,000, $25,000. So that's interesting if that comes to the UK as well. Presume that'll be sort of 22,000 including VAT, which is an interesting starting price. They're sort of saying they're fending off competition from the Chinese, expecting a huge amount of competition to come in with sort of on the cheap end. I do think that is why Stellantis has sort of always not got a lot of love over the last year or so, despite having quite a large electric rollout compared to some of the competition. But yeah, people are worried about under €20,000 cars coming from China and crowding the market out basically, and the brand loyalty won't come through. And that Stellantis don't really have all that much brand loyalty, sort of, brands like Citroen and Fiat certainly, Peugeot as well. There's just sort of more commodity brands as such, as opposed to VW with Volkswagen themselves and Audi sort of being more premium and more expensive, sort of probably not really competing with some of the Chinese brands that come in. So yeah, I just thought this was pretty good news. More cars from the sort of the popular brands. Bit of good news for TSMC and Intel as well. We sort of knew they were in discussions and sort of pushing for a Germany expansion, and both companies have secured rather a lot of funding for fab plants in Germany. So two different locations. Germany has pledged $22 billion in incentives. So yeah, not bad. Getting sort of part of the facility paid for. This is sort of good for both companies. Intel have been using TSMC for part of their lineup. It seems the GPUs certainly, and part of the sort of advanced chips that they can't quite build yet. They're still sort of saying it's next year, and 2025 is the big competition. Intel will drop manufacturing node and they say overtake TSMC, but they're still sort of projecting to be spending quite a lot with TSMC regardless. And I still have my reservations that Intel's competition, i.e. sort of AMD and potentially Nvidia if they get into AI, I sort of have reservations that they would want to use Intel and sort of give them all of their deepest, darkest secrets on the chips, for fear that they might sort of steal it or find a way to reverse engineer. Whereas TSMC don't design anything, they're just fabrication only, so there's never any risk of that. So I'm still sort of waiting to be convinced by Intel's sort of foundry business competing with TSMC. I really see it as Samsung and them as sort of the main competition, but we'll see. We had a good bit of news for Glencore as well at the beginning of the month. They closed their deal that they sort of announced earlier in the year. That was sort of always to go through later in the year for a stake in a 45% equity stake in a Rio de Norte mine and 30% equity in Alunorte. So reading up, these were aluminium plays basically, and they've sort of partly owned by Rio Tinto and other South 32 and sort of various shareholders, so it's only a stake, but yeah, not bad overall. It costs 700 million, looking like $700 million, so compared to the market cap, it's not a huge acquisition compared to sort of them going after Teck Resources, which admittedly is not something I really wanted them to go for, but yeah, they have done. So yeah, I thought a little bit of aluminium sort of diversifies them a little bit, and yeah, pushes sort of towards something that I think will do well in the future. Sort of with the electric cars, certainly cars are getting heavier, so switching sort of any steel parts to aluminium if you can, from what I understand, is desirable. Make the car a little bit lighter to compensate for heavier batteries. So yeah, I thought that was quite good, even if it is sort of only a small acquisition. So just looking at the rest of the news, UK sort of earnings come slightly down. I think this is including the bonus. Excluding the bonus was sort of as expected. So yeah, it's always distorting things, I guess. Unemployment sort of stayed the same, 4.2%. And you had the US CPI numbers was sort of across the board as expected, but sort of the expectations were a little bit mixed. Headline CPI was down slightly. Core CPI was sort of the same, but up slightly on the month. But yeah, sort of as expected, really. That sort of got people slightly nervous, I think, that inflation sort of wasn't really coming down, and sort of core was potentially starting to rise, but I think you can't really get bogged down in sort of 0.1%. So it's sort of anybody's game trying to guess that. And then yeah, so Wednesday you had the FOMC press conference, which we covered, and then Thursday you had the UK. We sort of follow the US as everyone was expecting, similar with the EU, sort of all unchanged. Obviously, US are still at 5.5, and we're at 5.25. EU sort of 4.5%, so they're always lower. I expect they'll sort of they never wanted to rise at all, so they may be the first to cut. But yeah, interesting. US sort of sales data. All sort of slightly better than expected, but is somewhat negative. So that was pretty much all the news. Portfolio-wise, as I say, not a huge sort of great big change. It's just across the board done reasonably well. As I say, Stellantis sort of really pushing forwards, 23.46 now. Largest stock certainly in this portion. Vanguard Emerging Markets still second, still considering sort of what to do with that long term. Taiwan Semiconductor sort of not really up with the rest of the semiconductor stocks this week. They've sort of had a pretty good week. Yeah, I didn't really mention Broadcom, up to $1,129. That's really pushing on. It's sort of doesn't seem to be any super significant news. They've got their VMware deal through, but that was a little while ago, and Nvidia sort of isn't particularly green for the last sort of couple of weeks. So yeah, not really quite sure what is pushing this quite so far forward, but we'll take it. It's all good. I do sort of start to consider maybe taking a bit of profit, considering there isn't that much news, and sort of what I thought would be pushing it up, as I say, happened sort of a few weeks ago, really. But yeah, he's starting to sort of push up in PE ratios. Trailing has always been quite high because they are relatively fast growing, so I do tend to look at forward PE, but yeah, they used to be sort of well, in the teens really when I bought them, and I think they're now looking at forward of sort of 25, maybe high 20s. So yeah, do start to think about maybe trimming it. Himax as well, above $6, doing reasonably well. We do want that to sort of push forward, especially for my options. But yeah, I'm patient. It's 2020, end of 2025 bet on those, so need a couple more good earnings quarters. Miners doing, base metal miners doing quite well, as I say. Sort of Glencore pushed up a little bit, partly maybe due to that acquisition, and sort of Vale and Rio just sort of trickling up. So all good. On the ISA side, though, is sort of where a lot of stuff is really pushing on. So, as I say, Cleanspark sort of provided some of that gain up to 1064 now. I am really sort of just waiting for the ETF news. I think if we get a positive move on the ETF and a spike on Bitcoin, then I think this could probably shoot right up, and then I might start to think it's overvalued. If I'm able to buy those ETFs, then if I can, I would probably switch this to BlackRock ETF if we're allowed to buy it, assuming Cleanspark has sort of gone to, I don't know, $15-20 maybe. If we get a reasonable spike up in Bitcoin, I'm probably going to be thinking it's sort of not worth the risk compared to just holding Bitcoin. So yeah, there's that. Coeur Mining, as I say, really sort of pushing up now, $3.54. Obviously, I was buying it in the low $3 originally, but sort of heavily averaged down, so I'm well in the green now, and it's a £20,000 position. Equinox sort of not really quite moved up as high as the others. Fortuna sort of been moving up a reasonable amount. Especially with Equinox Gold nearly sort of finishing their expansion. They're sort of saying it's 96% complete and sort of ready for first pours in maybe late in the first quarter, sort of early in the second quarter. So really the big money is coming next year, but we'll see. The REITs sort of compared to this lot don't really seem to move all that much. It's just slow and steady, really. I got reminded that, of course, I sold off part of my Stag Industrial, so I got a £3 dividend instead of an £8 dividend. But yeah, I knew that. On the small ISA side, just with the two positions, Pan American and KGHM, both doing reasonably well. Obviously KGHM partly due to the silver, because copper hasn't really sort of done all that much. And the invest side, the Chinese sort of have had a slight bump, but yeah, we're sort of talking about Alibaba in the high 80s just sort of a couple of months ago, so a bump from 70 to 74 doesn't really do a huge amount. Still well in the red on that. But the options are motoring along, obviously, with that fair move up in Coeur Mining. Stock's up 21% for the week. The options have really rocketed up, and it's sort of by far my largest position now on the options. Cleanspark sort of still doing reasonably well, considering I've only got 11 of those. Hymax sort of going above $6 seems to have really helped those, up to 2.5 now. And of course Equinox lagging behind, and the others just sort of smaller positions. But yeah, going from sort of what was under sort of under about 7 or 8,000 pounds worth of options, these are now 18,000. So certainly a lot of leverage available on the options, and I do still have 3,800 in cash available. I was able to pick up 3 Equinox options fairly cheap, but not really buying a lot of these at the moment, partly because I want the cash, and partly because yeah, they're just not all that good value compared to what they were. So yeah, that's the portfolio for the week. Let me know how you guys are doing, if you're buying anything, or if you're sort of seeing the profit that the market certainly seems to be seeing. And yeah, long may this outperformance continue. Like and subscribe, and see you soon.